DEFRA colleagues who will be part and parcel of the Q&A session today are Victoria Clark, who's the imports delivery lead for AOS, and Marilyn Mansfield Williams, who's the senior policy advisor for plant health imports. And the APHA colleagues who are part of the panel today are Joe Robbins, who's the Border Control Post Manager from APHA's BCP Designation and Audit team. And also we've got the AOS Imports team, who's led by Ahmed Hamid and Gail Bosley. Next slide, please. So before we get onto the agenda, I'd like you to start to submit your questions via the Microsoft Teams function. Any questions today? We're only going to be able to answer general questions around the AOS proposal. If you've got any other specific questions around the border target operating model or anything else, you can email these to the plant health mailbox, and the email address is hopefully on your screen now. So just leave that for a few seconds for you to take note of that email address. Next slide, please. So we'll start by giving some background on the Border Target Operating Model, or BTOM for short. And then what we'll do is we'll go into more details on the AOS proposal, looking at the eligibility criteria, what's involved in the timeline for the pilot as well. We'll also run through the CP designation process, as being control point designated is one of the main eligibility criteria for AOS. What we'll do then is that we'll move on to the Q&A part of our session. So there's a lot to get through, but we're aiming to make this as engaging as possible. Next slide, please. So just to set the scene a little bit and give a bit of background, the BTOM, or Border Target Operating Model, continues the phased import regime for plant health controls and moving goods from GB and the EU, Liechtenstein and Switzerland. The BTOM was launched in April, and there was a period of engagement where we asked for traders to comment on the proposals. Thanks to everyone that was involved in that and for your contributions towards this. The proposal has now been finalised, and the timeline for the new import controls is published in the BTOM. If you can find out more about the plant health proposals by scanning the QR code on the screen or following the link. Next slide, please. So, the authorised operator status. So one of the proposals within the Border Target Operating Model is to explore the introduction of this delegated authority model for the checks of plants and plant products, which would allow eligible traders to manage their own phytosanitary risks. This approach would be called the authorised operator status. AOS proposes to give this responsibility to authorised operators, or AOs for short, to carry out their own physical and identity checks, provided they meet certain eligibility criteria as completion and of all prescribed training. AOS aims to allow importers to have the opportunity to benefit from these additional flexibility over the location and timing of their import checks. The BTOM has committed to piloting AOS, and we'll discuss this further, what the pilot entails and how you can get involved as part and parcel of the pilot. So next slide, please. So the AOS pilot timelines. So to be just very clear for everyone, at this stage, the AOS is a proposal, and a decision on whether to implement AOS will be taken following the pilot. AOS needs to be tested and piloted to evaluate how feasible the approach is, both for the trade's operational competency and to ensure biosecurity risks have been managed and mitigated. The pilot may demonstrate non-feasibility, and consequently a decision may be made that AOS may not proceed. So what is the timeline for the testing in pilot? And DEFRA will be testing elements of AOS from the end of October 2023. What will then happen is that we'll release further guidance on the pilot, which traders can read and decide whether or not they would like to express an interest in being part and parcel of the pilot. Following the successful testing, eligible traders will be able to apply for the pilot through an expression of interest application form. This will open during the early part of 2024, and what we will do then is have another online session once we've gone live with the form to give traders further guidance on how to submit this application. The AOS pilot is due to commence in Q2 of 2024, and businesses will be notified in advance of whether their application has been successful to be part and parcel of the pilot. Just to note too that not all applicants will form part of the pilot. There'll be a selection process to ensure there's a wide range of businesses and sectors included in the pilot. Next slide, please. Scope of the pilot. Okay, so the AOS pilot will include most plants and plant products apart from potatoes, seed and ware potatoes, grain and seed. So this is due to the training requirements for these commodities not being achievable within the pilot timescales. Also, what is out of scope is wood and wood products, and there will be further consideration given to these commodities following the pilot. Next slide, please. So the eligibility criteria. The pilot will be open to GB businesses that trade with the EU and rest of the world, and businesses must meet the following criteria to apply for the pilot. So what we've got is be established in the UK. So authorised operators will need to be established in the UK for customs purposes, as well as being registered with the relevant UK Plant Health Service. Number 2, appoint at least 2 authorised persons and 1 person responsible. So the authorised persons will perform the physical and identity import examinations. The person responsible will act as the central point of contact and have overall accountability for the organisation's authorised status. Compliance with competent authority inspection management systems. So the authorised operators will be supplied with standard operating procedures or SOPs, outlining the procedures that they will need to follow. There must also be a control point designated premises and associated customs authorisation. Authorised operators must have a premises that's designated and customs authorised as a CP to enable goods to move away from the border to the authorised operator site for their import checks to be completed in a biosecure manner. Any businesses that are not yet designated as CP status who submit an expression of interest will only be favourably considered if they are in the latter stages of being approved. That is, a final site visit undertaken or imminently planned, even though given time to enable the designation process to be completed ahead of the pilot starting. Authorised persons must complete all training provided and demonstrate competence through competent authority assessments to be able to carry out the inspections. So the authorised persons must complete all the training and pass an assessment on the competent authorities inspection processes, which include detections of suspect quarantine organisms. The authorised persons will need to demonstrate competence to work at the required standards to a competent authorities assessor. And also participate in systematic audits as well as risk-targeted visits to ensure comprehensive oversight. So Audits will need to be more frequent during the pilot and during the initial rollout of the scheme as arrangements evolve and bed in. Unscheduled audits may be conducted where non-compliance is suspected. So that's the criteria as part and parcel of the pilot. Next slide, please. So what does the pilot entail? So the start of the pilot will involve thorough training for authorised operators who complete all module-based webinars and all subsequent training provided as part of the AOS pilot. Following the training, the authorised operators will carry out examinations of their imports, prescribed procedures under the competent authority. That will be either APHA or Scottish Government. There will be flexibility regarding how these hours of training are built into working week. Towards the end of the pilot, there will be an auditing process to ensure that the authorised operators or AOs are following the relevant standard operating procedures, SOPs, keeping appropriate records, and to test this process. Next slide, please. So, what are the current options for the border checks of your goods? So now we've covered the main aspects of AOS pilot. We wanted to spend some time discussing the other options for plant health checks of your goods. As you'll be aware, from the 30th of April 2024, the places of destinations or pods will be ending. Pods were a temporary measure for the SPS checks of your goods. AOS won't be suitable for everyone's business model, and there are two other options already in place for SPS checks of your goods. So if you're importing high risk or medium risk plants or plant products, you'll need to decide which of these current options will likely fit your business type. So the first option is to have your goods come through a border control post or BCP, where the goods can be arrived and inspected. So the goods will be inspected by the competent authority, again, either APHA, plant health inspectors, or Scottish Government inspectors, depending on location. The second option is becoming designated as a control point and to have your checks conducted again by the competent authority on site. And of course, as we've just gone through, there is, if you've got a control point designation alongside the other requirements just mentioned, you'll be able to apply as well for the AOS pilot. We're going to go into more detail around the control point designation process later, but on the next slide, we wanted to show you a short video which goes into further details on how checks are conducted at a BCP. Next slide, please. And can you please play the BCP video? Okay. Hopefully that gives everyone a good indication of how checks are conducted at a BCP. Next slide, please. So things to consider when deciding which option is best for you. So the choice and option will depend on business-specific factors such as the inspection rate of imports, whether they're daily, weekly, monthly, seasonal arrivals, logistic arrangements from arrivals to dispatch, such as containerized, full loads, low part loads, ro-ro or air freight, and also the BCP operating hours and services offered, which will be site specific, and also whether businesses actually use an agent or not, and the services they actually provide. So there's lots of different factors to consider, and that will only be decided on each business as to whether this is an option to suit them or not. Next slide, please. So what we've gone over the main aspects of AOS, and before going into more details on the control point designation, we'll address some frequently asked questions about AOS. So the first one that we've got is as follows. If I'm a CP designated, will I automatically be able to take part in the AOS pilot? So what we've said earlier is that CP designation is a key criteria of AOS. There's no guarantee that you will be selected as part of the AOS pilot. If you decide to become CP designated, this means that SPS checks can be conducted at your premises by a competent authority, again by either AFA Plant Health or Scottish Government colleagues, if you are not part of the AOS pilot. If you are CP designated, alongside being UK established business and have customs authorization, you can apply for the AOS pilot. There will be a selection process to ensure that we have a range of businesses and sectors included in the pilot to test the feasibility of AOS. So question number 2 is, will the devolved administrations be involved in the pilot? That is Welsh and Scotland. So Welsh and Scots colleagues are involved currently in the development of the test and pilot approach. Ideally, what we would like is at least one business from each nation involved in the pilot, but this will be dependent on where the applications are located. There will be an expression of interest for trade to apply as part of the pilot, and it'll be launched from Q1 early 2024. Traders will need to be a control point, as we've briefly discussed, to be part of the pilot, as this is a key criteria of the authorization. The third one is, what are the costs involved in gaining AOS or authorized operator status? So we're looking into a fee structure based on the cost recovery for services for APHA and Scottish Government across GB. Participants will not be subject to AOS fees during the actual pilot itself, but however, if the pilot is successful, it is expected that AOS will be subject to fees going forward. The statutory plant health fees for documentary, identity and physical import inspections will continue to apply for participants of AOS during the pilot, and these fees will be charged as they currently are at the moment. Next slide, please. So the control point designation. So now we're just going to go through the control point designation, please. Next slide, slide 16, overview of the process. So the control points are inland inspection points, which operate under customs supervision and must comply with customs requirements. Control point designation requires that minimum premises requirements are in place for biosecure import controls. What I'll do now is I'll quickly run through the minimum requirements, which is part of the Official Controls Regulation, the OCR. So these requirements include that there are a sufficient number of qualified staff to oversee operations. There's appropriate facilities in place to ensure biosecurity. Equipment to enable performance of checks, including access to Wi-Fi and import IT systems, and arrangements in place to prevent risks of cross-contamination and compliance with biosecurity standards. But there are also additional requirements the CPs must provide, such as storage areas to ensure the safety of each consignment and the quality of each facility. Most CPs so far have met the requirements through adaptation of existing premises, such as warehouses. This is usually there's usually flexibility in how these requirements are fulfilled if the overall objective of managing biosecurity risks of inspections is achieved. If the final designation audit indicates that the facility is not compliant, DEFRA will advise what remedial work is required. For more information on CPs, to get an application form, you will need to send an email to DEFRA in England and Wales, or our Scottish colleagues in the emails that are on the slide. So you've got the DEFRA OCR at defra.gov.uk, and you've got BCP Scotland at gov.scot.